All right, great. Welcome to episode 9 of the Students of Real Estate podcast. Today we are joined by Ashlyn Kerr, a real estate developer and consultant in the greater Boston area and a Bentley alum. Ashlyn, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Lorenzo and Adam. Great to be with you guys. Much appreciated.
Definitely. So, for those who don't know, I'm Lorenzo. I'm a junior at Bentley and also the VP at the real estate group.
My name's Adam Fuller. I'm a senior here, and I'm also a senior advisor at the real estate group.
Awesome. So, Ashlyn, we'll just start off by asking you kind of, just about yourself and about your background, where you're from, where you grew up, and kind of what led you to Bentley University.
Yeah. So I am from Boston, born and raised. My parents are Irish immigrants, but they've always loved the city. So my siblings and I are very fortunate. Grew up in the city of Boston in Dorchester. My parents are still here. We're all still here. So we're very much big proponents and believers in the city of Boston. We really love it. So I always knew I wanted to stay relatively close to home. I know we'll probably get into this a little bit more too, but always knew I wanted to be in sort of the real estate sector. Business in particular was always really appealing to me. Bentley was a very natural fit in that sense. Really, really good program. We were, when I was touring schools and stuff, so neither of my parents went to college. I was the first, obviously, in my family, and never mind the fact being a first generation American student as well, first generation college student. So that process was, a little bit chaotic, very overwhelming process for anyone going through it the first time. But I just remember touring Bentley with my parents, in particular touring Bentley, and how impressed they were with the school. So I think there was certainly an element of, okay, wow, this is their American dream, right? This is me coming here. And I think I was equally impressed and equally benefited from the opportunities. Really, really great school, great programs, great education. Wanted to stay relatively close to home. We're a tight-knit family, as most immigrant families are. So it was nice to be able to come back and forth as needed too.
Definitely. So you mentioned you always wanted to be in real estate. Can you expand on that? Why real estate? Were you introduced to it by your family?
Yeah, that is exactly it, Lorenzo. So my dad, like most Irish immigrants in this country, is a contractor by trade, does some small scale real estate development. So I very much grew up in the business. My dad left school at 14 years old and can't use a computer. So I from a young age was doing a lot of, the accounting work and kind of any of the tech work, book work and stuff like that. Enjoyed going to the job sites with him on the weekends. So always really enjoyed that world. Was very fortunate. I had a front row seat for so long there on both the construction side and the development side and the rental side as well. My parents have a number of rental properties too. So was exposed to it from a young age. I think I also recognized that how hard my parents had worked to build that, right, for us, for my siblings and I, and for their future. And I think it would be a shame to kind of not leverage that or not be able to continue to build on that. So it was partly, it's a little bit of the family business, but ultimately it was, I do enjoy this world in so many different sectors of it. So I was lucky that I enjoy the family business and was lucky that I've had the opportunities to kind of evolve and grow into that area.
Awesome. Sounds good. So obviously, like you said, you were growing up around it. And in Bentley, were you more like career oriented or more of, I want to work already, I already know what I want to do, or were you more of figuring things out as you go?
Yeah. Good question. I have to say Bentley definitely broadened my horizons. I went to Bentley as most kids coming from probably a small family business do, thinking, I'll go here and I'll get my degree and then I'll go work for my dad. My dad was like, no, you aren't. You're going to go work for somebody else. But I have to say in that, right, in those 4 years, Bentley, obviously a really, really great business education, but I think the broadness of that business education was really beneficial to me. I realized that there's so many other things that I also enjoy and I'm interested in. I never expected management, for example, to be something that I'd be interested in, or operations, but I found, I actually kind of really am interested in these things. So I think just, you've got your kind of core classes and your graduation requirements, but I think Bentley does a really good job ensuring that no matter what your degree is, you're going to be really well-rounded. So that definitely helped me in terms of, broadening my career path, right? I went in sort of thinking this is what my life is going to be, this is what my path is going to be. And it became so much more than I ever could have imagined, in part due to the Bentley education.
Awesome. Sounds good. I agree. Every time we do a podcast, everybody says, the career services at Bentley are amazing. I agree 100%. I was doing the same thing and working with them. They provided me a bunch of resources. So it's definitely, very useful. So I want to talk a little bit more about, after graduating. You graduated in 2016, and you kind of dove right into real estate. So just talk about that experience. Your first few years out of college. What were your roles? What were your kind of responsibilities? And how also did you find those opportunities to those different jobs?
Yeah. I was lucky, and I think this is probably one of the benefits of going to school somewhere close to home, is that you automatically have a bit of a network. I was very fortunate. I worked the entirety of my 4 years at Bentley with a group I've known for a long time, a couple of guys, family friends of my dad's, and people I kind of had grown up with. They had both a property management arm as well as a hard money lending arm. So I was with them. They were awesome, really, really flexible, whatever hours or availability I had, whether it was winter break or a spring semester or summer break, whatever it was, they were able to throw a bunch of stuff at me. And so I got a lot of exposure through that. It's also great to be kind of working and learning at the same time, because I think it just all sinks in and you absorb it that bit better. It's almost like, people say, oh, there's no point doing a master's until you've actually worked, because then you don't know what you're applying it to. So I kind of found, okay, I'm doing stuff in class and then I'm doing it the very next day in reality, right, in a job. So that was very beneficial to me. So I stayed with them for a little bit after graduating, again, kind of straddling the property management company, the hard money lending company, two really interesting businesses, right? These guys had done really, really well established, worked really hard. So learned a bunch there, and then actually ended up going on a career course that I never saw coming in public service. So again, I grew up in the city of Boston, obviously. Thought I'd go work with my dad, didn't end up happening. And I was like, okay, want some interesting opportunities. And I ended up going to the Boston Planning and Development Agency, which is now the Boston Planning Department, which is the city of Boston's permitting and regulatory body for real estate development projects and economic development for that matter too. So the clearinghouse really in Boston City Hall for almost all of the real estate development that happens in the city. So I went there thinking, we'll see how this goes. I'll do a couple of years, learn a bunch, hopefully make some connections, learn how the process works a little bit on this side, and then see what happens from there. I always was focused on kind of getting back to the development side and transitioning to being a developer or being on the actual private side of it. So that was always in the back of my mind. I ended up having a really, really great experience with the BPDA and in City Hall. I was there during a really, really enjoyable and interesting and fun, fast-paced time for the city. There was a bunch of stuff going on under then Mayor Marty Walsh. Was very fortunate. I worked for some excellent people in my direct reports. Jonathan Greeley, who's now with Amazon in economic development. Mike Christopher, who's now at Shawmut Construction and Design in a business development role. And Brian Golden, who was the director at the time. So really fortunate that I was surrounded by really, really good people in what was sort of my first real job, right? I kind of had grown up in the last stuff, but then was entering this place where, okay, this is me coming, just have my degree, right? Kind of getting my feet under me. So very fortunate to have worked for such excellent people. And I think even more so fortunate that I was doing really, really enjoyable, challenging work from a very young age, right? I was 21, 22, straight out of school. I had a bunch of friends who were kind of in jobs that they didn't really like, but, it was your job and your first job, you're figuring it out. Okay, do you want to go back to grad school or you're going to stay in that? What are you going to do? But I didn't have a single day in my time at City Hall that I didn't enjoy. There were tough days, challenging days, as there always are in any job, particularly in public service. But every day was really fun, really fast-paced. And that was just an incredible experience for me. I think, no matter where my career ends up, where my future leads me, whatever happens down the line, so much of that will be from those years in City Hall. They were really formative. I think in particular developing my soft skills, right? You're learning how to talk to people, how to engage with people, how to negotiate every single day, right? How to get to yes, how to balance conflicting needs and wants. So I took a lot from that experience.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. I did want to actually just jump back to kind of circle back to your managerial economics major and concentration in law, how that's really like a perfect fit, in my opinion, for public service and now kind of moving on to your advisory roles. But can you talk through kind of how you picked that? I know you said you were always interested in real estate, but a lot of people here interested in real estate will take the kind of purely financial pathway. Could you kind of just talk to, the fact of different avenues and kind of being able to explore different opportunities, not necessarily just a one lane kind of mindset into real estate for college students right now?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Adam, because I think that is often what we see, right? Is people think real estate and they think, okay, I've got to go down finance, or I've got to go down the accounting side, whatever it may be, or, back in from private equity, whatever path they end up taking. I ended up doing managerial econ and law because I was at one point contemplating law school, but also because they're the things I'm genuinely interested in. I think in this sector, we have a lot of people who are really, really smart and sharp financially. And now we're seeing, with AI technologies and stuff like that, okay, what is the future of an analyst role, right? To what level is that kind of a human job at, 5, 10, 15 years from now, or is it all just you're feeding programs that are underwriting every single deal? But I think I focused on the areas that I did because I like it, right? So that was sort of number one, was I'm going to do something I like. I think a lot of people get, it's tough. It's really hard to pick a major, especially with a world that's so big and broad right now, and you can't really pigeonhole yourself or sort of think, oh, well, this will get me this job, or this is what I'm going to need to do this. So I focused on what I enjoy, but also something that was going to give me a really broad base, useful base. I think with the law minor, being able to read and synthesize and write are really, really undervalued skills right now. I see it all the time in talking to young people, right? It's like, it's obvious that kind of fall off in recent years, I think, in young people being able to really synthesize information, communicate really well, particularly verbally and written skills, right? So that's something that automatically I found in my career positioned me really, really well, right? Being able to stand out as, because I'd done a number of law classes, because I enjoyed that, I was always a pretty good writer, pretty good reader, pretty good communicator. That stands out right away. When you're in discussions, you're in conversations, and you're able to articulate really, really well, or you're able to convey messages really, really well. Real estate's all about negotiation and people skills, essentially, right? It's a people business. So I come back to, Excel can run numbers, machines can run numbers, but at the end of the day, it's a people-facing and a people-touching business. So those soft skills I've found to be very, very beneficial. Now, I understand fully it's not the norm for people that are kind of business-focused, right? And again, I think we do tend to get bogged down, or I've got to be really, really financially savvy. And I'm not saying that's not the case at all. There absolutely is a need for that. You have to be able to understand the numbers and run models and be able to understand what you're producing. But I think there's an added benefit to being able to be a little bit more on the communicative side.
Yeah, I mean, that question is also a good transition to the other one I'm going to ask now, is because obviously you spent 5 years at BPDA and you were a project manager, right? So obviously you have to, like you said, you have to know your numbers, but it's also, you can't just go out and if you can't just expect you're going to build a project without knowing how to manage it or knowing how the construction works, right? So you need to be experienced with that. So I'm curious, if you can expand on more your experience as a project manager. What more specifically were you working on at BPDA?
Yeah. So I was sort of the shepherd for these large projects that had to get through the city permitting process and regulatory process. So for example, some of the projects I worked on was I did all of the Seaport. I did the Parcel 12 projects, which is Samuels and Associates air rights project that just got built over the Mass Turnpike. That was a really cool one because that literally appeared out of thin air as far as development goes. I did the MGM Music Hall with Fenway and the Red Sox. I did, worked on Back Bay Station a little bit, worked on the Raffles Hotel. So a number of different things. Dorchester Bay City, Dot Block, which is in my neighborhood here in Dorchester. So I had a really, really diverse kind of portfolio of properties and some really challenging projects. So I was helping, essentially projects would come into the BPDA and you get assigned a project manager, and that project manager then guides you through the process. So that includes the BPDA's internal review. So the now planning department is staffed with architects, planners, transportation planners, environmental architects, compliance and housing specialists. So there's a whole internal process of review. And then there's sort of this broader city review. So that can be Parks Department, Boston Transportation Department, Environmental Department, and then there's the public review. So that's, you're working with neighborhood groups, and you're working with elected officials, and you're working with neighbors and abutters to these projects. And then obviously the developer themselves and their team of consultants. So through that work, you're constantly interfacing, you're constantly talking to people and working and engaging with different groups and building relationships, which ultimately is incredibly valuable, especially in this city and in this industry. So I was very lucky, through that work, had the opportunity to build really, really strong relationships with a number of developers in the city, some of the biggest developers and most prominent developers in the city, with elected officials, with my colleagues across the planning department and city government, and across the city and community groups and neighbors. So really, really valuable experience. Again, very rewarding. You're constantly trying, every single one of those people and groups that I just mentioned oftentimes has different priorities and different objectives on any particular project. So you're constantly trying to balance all those things. But it was an incredible opportunity because I got so much exposure and experience. And oftentimes through the planning department, because this city has such a public process for development and such a community engaged public process, I got a ton of exposure, right? Which is great. You know, you oftentimes were the face of the city in a lot of these neighborhoods for a lot of these projects. So you inevitably, you know, you get chances to be in front of 300 people running a public meeting. That, you know, you don't get those opportunities often, but there's a lot you can learn and take from those opportunities when you do get them.
Yeah, sounds good. I obviously, this leads us to a bunch of other questions, but I want to briefly just quickly go through. You spent 5 years at BPDA, public sector, and then you briefly switched over to the private sector at national development. So just talk about that experience over there. What was your role? Why the transition? And then also the transition over to being an independent developer and consultant as well, before we jump into development in Boston.
Sure. So went into City Hall, obviously, and into that job at the Boston Planning and Development Agency, always in the back of my mind, okay, I don't want to be in public service forever, right? This is temporary. I'm going to learn and take from this as much as I can and grow, and then go do something else, ideally something on the development side, private sector. Whether that be with my family or kind of a smaller shop or somewhere bigger, that was to be determined. So that was always in the back of my mind. And it kind of dragged out as I got to the BPDA and realized, oh, this is pretty fun work. It's really interesting. I'm enjoying it. And then COVID hit and that kind of changed the pace of things a little bit, just because there was a year where, you know, no one really knew what was happening, what was going to happen in the world, how the market was going to shake out. There's a whole bunch of variables. So what probably would have been 3 or 4 years ended up becoming 5 years, I had no issue with that. Again, had a really great experience, enjoyed every minute of my time in City Hall. And then I ended up going over to National Development, which is a fairly prominent commercial developer based out in Newton. They are fully vertically integrated, which was probably number one on my wish list when I was looking at places I could possibly go after City Hall. So they do almost everything in-house, right? They've got leasing in-house. They do acquisitions in-house, development in-house. There's a sister construction company, so there's the capability to do that in-house as well. Legal's done in-house. And the reason I wanted to go somewhere that had that sort of structure was because when I started talking to people about, you know, thinking about what was going to happen after I left City Hall, and just, you know, part of the benefit of being in the BPDA was, again, developing a really, really strong and great network. And we're very fortunate in this city that we have a very generous and supportive real estate industry. So there's a lot of people who I've spent a lot of time with my entire career, right? That have been very good sounding boards and mentors. So greatly appreciative to all those folks I've ever spent time with and continue to spend time with. But one of the first questions people would ask is, well, what do you want to do, right? You know, is there a particular asset type you want to do? Do you want to do resi? Do you want to do commercial? Do you want to do retail? Or is it, do you want to do development, or do you want to do leasing, or do you want to do planning, or do you want to do kind of more consulting on the permitting side? And the answer to a lot of that I found was, I don't know, because I don't know the private side of these larger projects well enough yet. I know the public side of these larger projects really, really well. I know the private side of smaller projects really, really well from being involved in my family's stuff and my other previous jobs prior to that. But I didn't know what the larger commercial scale looked like on the private side all that well yet. So I wanted to go somewhere where I could try to see as many of those things as possible, with the goal of, okay, figuring out what do I like the most, because what we oftentimes see in real estate is super broad, right? But oftentimes as your career progresses, people end up developing some level of a niche or some level of particular segment of the industry that they're best at or most interested in, whether that's, okay, retail or brokerage or development, multifamily development or brokerage, whatever it may be, right? So you end up kind of gravitating towards one niche or one particular segment of the industry as your career progresses and develops. But I felt I wasn't at a point yet to be able to commit myself to that. So I was very fortunate. Went over to national development as a project manager on their development team. And with the goal there was there's a number of projects in the pipeline, ranging from industrial to multifamily to senior living. National is a very fairly diversified company, fairly diversified portfolio. And the goal there was just to learn development, right? To do it ground up, manage the development cycle for these projects. Unfortunately, the economy ended up taking a little bit of a spin. So a lot of that stuff didn't materialize as anyone would have hoped or expected, which led to some challenges for a number of businesses all across the city and all across the region. So I finished up with National at the end of 2023. Ended up actually, we got married, my husband and I got married shortly thereafter. So it was nice to have some time. That's another important piece of career advice I would offer to folks. Always take some time when you have it. Time is a gift. So always enjoy it when you have it for whatever the reason. And then came back and have kind of transitioned now into some of the work I'm doing. But was very lucky with national development, really, really smart, capable team, very well established. It's a challenging market right now. They, just as much as anybody, are trying to figure out how to navigate that. But they're a very well diversified, well established company. So I think they'll probably be well set up to figure it out just as well as anybody can. But was very fortunate to spend some time with some really, really good people, really smart people there, and learned a bunch. I got what I wanted from that experience, right? Was seeing as much of the development process as I can. I was lucky. I ended up working on a big industrial project, which industrial projects typically move pretty quickly because industrial construction is quite simple compared to other types of construction, and permitting processes in this case can be quite effective and efficient. So I was very fortunate. I got to see one massive industrial project from start to finish, essentially, in my time there. Whereas if you're working on more complex mixed use or even multifamily or commercial projects, it can be 4, 5, 6 years, and you still haven't really seen anything from start to finish. So I was lucky. I got one full life cycle on a big project there and was able to do some other stuff as well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We covered a lot of ground there. I definitely kind of want to just, for our audience, be able to give them a little bit of a crash course into development, because, development is such a broad industry and there's so many niches, like you mentioned. And you really had exposure to a lot of that. But I mean, you mentioned, having to talk with architects, politicians, developers, like really any stakeholders of the city or whatever projects you'd be working on. Can you just kind of give a crash course, maybe in terms of the development cycle, or maybe like a quick example, just to provide a little bit of context, a little bit of like clarity around what development is and what it really looks like?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll use, Adam, just by way of reference, I'll use the city of Boston. That's the process and kind of cycle I know the best. So your first step will always be acquisitions, right? And that can be, you may find an opportunity organically. It might be, you making the effort to search yourself and there's a traditional on-market opportunity. It may be something, a neighbor who's selling a property, or, a broker calls you, whatever it may be. So there's a variety of ways that these opportunities and deals, as the industry likes to call them, right, can kind of materialize. So that's step number one. Step number two is typically your due diligence phase, where you're looking at, okay, what is the property? What is the zoning? What can I do here? If the zoning is, kind of restrictive, are there opportunities for rezoning, whether that be in the city of Boston through the Zoning Board of Appeals, or if it's a BPDA, Boston Planning Department, Article 80 project, through the Zoning Commission. In that due diligence period as well, you're looking at, any kind of red flags to look out for. Are there any challenges to the site? This could be, logistical challenges, right? Are you, are there any utility easements and all these different things that appear through the due diligence site? We are really just trying to, in a very sort of short window of time, trying to do a rough underwriting of a potential project or of a potential deal to see what it can be. So there's a lot of things you need to look out for through those processes. You can involve consultant teams for some of that work, right? It's not uncommon in a due diligence period to be working with an architect on sort of a high-level plan or scheme, a test fit, as we would usually call it, kind of, okay, here's the piece of property, or here's the piece of land, how many units can we get schematically, or what can we fit dimensionally? Or it's not uncommon to be engaging engineers, right? If you have different logistical challenges to the site, or if there's for example, grading or topography challenges, trying to understand, okay, what type of water retention systems or, runoff systems will we need to use here? What's the expense of those? What level or extent of underground work will we need, right? Are we going to need a basement? Are we going to need to dig deep for foundations based on the topography of the site or the structure of the building, et cetera? So there's a lot that happens in the due diligence period. And it's really, really important because that ultimately is oftentimes what the thesis of your investment becomes for any particular project or deal. From there, it's usually then you're looking at financing. Okay, how am I, if this is something I want to pursue and I have an idea of what this is going to be or what I want to pursue here on this piece of land or on this property, how am I financing that? How am I paying to acquire the property? What is my finance or my capital structure? Am I going to do a traditional mortgage, just, traditional capital lender through a bank, fairly straightforward? Do I have an opportunity? I think we're seeing a lot of this now, which is great. Do I have an opportunity as potentially a first-time home buyer, right? To do something a little bit more creative in some of these cities and municipalities that are really pushing some of these efforts, which is great. Am I going to bring in a partner, right? Or on the more complex side, is there an opportunity for some type of JV, a joint venture that involves the existing landowner that maybe they can actually kind of contribute the land to the future project, and then it works out. Okay, it doesn't cost me as much money, but they're kind of rolling over the land basis. So there's a lot of different ways to physically acquire properties and financially acquire them. And sometimes it takes a lot of creativity, right? Especially in this market, it's a lot of creativity in terms of pulling these deals together and capitalizing projects. And from there, then if you're managed to kind of get that far and get the land under control and have a project you want to pursue, then you're engaging in the permitting process from there. So that means you're staffing up with your consultant teams, right? You've got to hire an architect, you've got to hire an engineer, you've got to hire, potentially a landscape architect, depending on the extent of the project. For some of these bigger ones in the city, it's, these consultant teams are 12 people, 24 people, lawyers, permitting lawyers, and zoning lawyers, transportation engineers and civil engineers and structural engineers and environmental engineers. So there's a whole host of folks involved in some of the bigger, more complex projects. But from there, you're building your vision for this property or for this piece of land. And if you're doing a straight sort of an acquisition of an existing building or something like that, maybe it's not permitting, maybe it's just some capital improvements. So, okay, some small renovations, et cetera, in which case you're working with a contractor or whoever's doing that work. But through that process, you're sort of bringing your plan to life, trying to bring your plan to life is the goal there. So in the city, that means then you begin to engage with, if your property meets the threshold or the project meets the threshold for the Boston Planning Department's Article 80 review, that means you're going through the Article 80 public review process. So that, again, involves the entire planning department and their internal review processes. It involves a number of other city agencies and their review processes that sort of get folded into that process, and a lot of outreach with the community and your neighbors and abutters and the elected officials. Projects have impacts. That's sort of the crux of the Article 80 process that the city of Boston have, is that, yes, there are inevitably impacts to development projects, and that process is there to help mitigate them and work through them to the best extent possible. For smaller projects, you're going through the Zoning Board of Appeals, which has become almost a similar process, just at a smaller scale. So you're engaging with your neighbors, with your community, with your elected officials. You have to do a city-sponsored public meeting, and then you're going to the Zoning Board of Appeal, which will review your case for zoning relief, which is not uncommon in this city. We've got a really old zoning code, so it's more common than not. And then from there, if you can get through zoning approvals and get permits in hand, there are a number of other permitting steps once you get zoning approvals and BPDA approval, but that's a lot of detail there. But ultimately, you're working towards construction, right? So then it comes together again, okay, you're actually trying to pull the trigger on, is it a construction financing loan? Is it just your own capital, right? If you're doing smaller scale renovations or something you can kind of manage without needing traditional lending, how does that look? And then you're getting your building permits, hopefully, and trying to get going. So it's a challenging process we have here in the city. It's a very unique process, one of, if not the most difficult permitting processes in the country. But it's, for all the frustration and angst that it can cause, I always like to say, by and large, projects do come out of it for the better. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing all that. And now we get to my favorite question, which you just kind of mentioned, developing in Boston specifically. So what do you think is unique about developing in Boston, but more specifically on the permitting and zoning and community engagement part of it? Because I've heard personally, Boston is, and you just kind of said it, it's very challenging relative to other markets. So just kind of talk about that specifically. Yeah.
Yeah. Very challenging, very unique. I think it's why we've seen for a long time that we have, there's the developers that work in Boston tend to work in Boston, and have been able to figure it out. There's definitely something to be said for having an expertise in this market. I think it all stems probably, Lorenzo, originally with our zoning code, right? And there's arguments to be made for rezoning the whole city. That would be easy, right? Then it's a little bit more predictable. But there's also arguments against that, right? You rezone the whole city and then you lose the ability to have a lot of these conversations and to engage on what's actually being built because it's just matter of fact, right? It either can happen or it can't. There is no discussion points or no opportunities for trying to mitigate some of the impacts of development. So I think a lot of it comes from just the zoning code. I think we also, as a city, we've changed substantially from when the zoning code was written, right? We are increasingly a younger city now than we ever were before. Traditionally, Boston was made up of predominantly families, working class families. Our student populations now are higher than they ever were before. So that's matriculating and translating to different types of living situations, different housing needs. Our economy has been fairly robust for the last number of years, again, which is a little bit of a transition than what it historically has been. We were always sort of heavy on the institutional stuff. We emerged as a global leader in life sciences and biotechnology when those sectors were hot. So that changed. Okay, we're not just building office buildings. Now we need labs. How does that look? So that's stuff that our traditional zoning code doesn't account for, right? So Boston has changed substantially. I think that's where a lot of the challenges come from. We haven't necessarily done a good job in keeping pace on the actual formalities of that on the zoning side, right? That's our zoning commission kind of sets zoning based on projects as they come in, which isn't a bad way of doing it either. But I think this is just, the process has sort of become a byproduct of how much Boston has been changing over recent years. And it's good, right? We've had a lot of growth over recent years. It's slowed down now, obviously. But there was a period, 2010, 2011 through sort of right before COVID, we were a really, really strong dynamic economy here in Boston in a lot of different ways. We're a really diversified city, which has always been a good thing for us too, because it kind of insulates you from a lot of the macroeconomic trends happening. We have the eds and meds, so the institutions, colleges and hospitals. We have a really strong student population, really well-educated workforce, really strong working class. We've always had a good level of families, and then obviously a good level of immigrants coming in and having opportunities here too. So all that stuff had contributed long-term to how Boston had emerged. So I think that's probably the biggest challenge, right, is our zoning. Next, then, sort of the ever-evolving makeup of the city and its economy, and its different sectors and strongholds. And now, I think now we're facing the biggest challenge right now in this city, this region, is we have a really challenging economic environment across the country, right? Really, really challenging. You're looking at interest rates, you're looking at tariffs, you're looking at the cost of labor. Those are things that are the same in every market you're looking at, no matter where you are, right? Everyone has those same issues. And now in the city of Boston, we have a lot of regulatory challenges. So, for example, now Boston is mandating as of July, I believe, that all new construction be net zero carbon. There's benefit to that, but there's a real cost to it as well, right? In an environment that costs are already so substantial. So it's really, really challenging to make any project work right now. We also have substantial affordable housing requirements, which again, it's great, right? I don't think anyone would ever argue that we should be building affordable housing, but there's a cost to that as well, because the cost to build each unit is so high now that, that those translate down to the bottom line in any pro forma or any model for a project. So the regulatory environment is really, really challenging right now too, in addition to what's already a very challenging economic environment.
Awesome. Yeah. So, I'm very curious on, I don't think a lot of people know this, that in the zoning process, it usually takes if I'm correct, for bigger projects, obviously, we're talking 6 to 9 months. For smaller projects, it might be 1 to 3 months. So I'm curious, why does it take that long? I mean, that's kind of, you have to hold the property, right? There's holding costs go up, and just curious. Obviously, you worked inside of the PDA, so you must know, why it takes 6 to 9 months. And also, I want to get your thoughts on, it's kind of a separate question, on the Cambridge rezoning that they did. I think they like abolished the single family zoning, and now you can build up to like 6 stories, I believe. So just get your thoughts on that. Why would they do it in Cambridge? Can we do something similar in Boston? Other than I've seen the net zero carbon, as you mentioned. Just talk about those nuances and all that.
So I think, so Cambridge, you brought up Cambridge, I'll start there just because that's a really interesting initiative. I'm not super well versed. I've obviously been following it just because it's interesting and it's relevant and it's local. Cambridge was one of the first cities in the country, I believe, to implement some really, really tight and very, very progressive affordable housing requirements, right? I don't know off the top of my head exactly what their ratios of inclusionary units or affordable units were, but it was a pretty substantial percentage. I think what they've done now in eliminating single family zoning, and they've essentially allowed, I think, right, to the extent I've looked at this, my understanding is they're now allowing single family zone lots to be 4 stories as of right, which in theory could be 4 units, 4 residential units, or a commercial and 3 residential, whatever way it may be split. I'm not sure in the specifics. But my take on that is they recognized, we were maybe a little bit too imposing on the affordable housing requirements, which actually stopped development because it makes it really challenging, right? And now we have to try to find a way to sort of retroactively fix some of what we've lost, right? So I don't know the numbers, but if I had to speculate, Cambridge probably didn't see a whole lot of new residential unit production over the last, I don't know, call it 5-10 years, whatever, since they brought in those really progressive affordable housing requirements. And now they're looking at ways to really spur some unit production and increase their supply of units, because the lack of supply, again, in part by way of those really kind of stringent affordable housing requirements, that lack of supply has increased price and cost, right? It's basic economics 101, supply and demand. So I think my personal take, right? I don't know for sure on this or whether this is even fact, but my personal take is what we've seen now is a little bit of we maybe reached a little bit too far, and we've got to correct some of this. And sorry, Lorenzo, what was the question on the city process in particular?
Yeah, no worries. I should have not meshed that together.
No, that's fine. It was a good question.
I learned kind of late on that it takes 6 to 9 months to build, to get approvals. So just curious on why does it take that long?
Yeah, that's a good question too. And I think it does come down to Boston does community engagement like nobody else does when it comes to development projects. Even for a simple, I live in the Savin Hill area in Dorchester. We have a lot of single family homes. If you want to, by and large now, if you want to put a dormer on your home, so just kind of bump out a sort of a partial 3rd floor, or, peaked roof window, whatever it may be, you have to do a public meeting for that. You have to get zoning relief. It takes at least 3 or 4 weeks to get your public meeting scheduled with the city. And then it takes 3 or 4 weeks to get your zoning meeting, your zoning board of appeals hearing scheduled. And then you've got to get your plans reviewed by the planning department. That can be another 4 to 6 weeks. And then you've got your building permit issued by ISD, which is at least kind of 4 to 8 weeks now. So it all just adds up. And again, I think the reasoning is Boston's process and community engagement is like nobody else's. And there's benefits to that. Right now, you come back to this argument for rezoning the whole city. A lot of that goes away, could go away. And yes, it does become more efficient because, as you rightfully noted, these all become carrying costs. If you're doing an actual ground up development project, I referenced sort of doing a dormer, which is kind of the easiest thing you can possibly do. And that's still, a few months to get that done from start to finish. If you're doing these development projects, every single day, every single month is a cost until you're able to actually get a shovel in the ground and ultimately get something delivered, right? That can start bringing money in the door by way of rents or revenue or sales, whatever it may be. So that only adds the sort of the challenges in the timeline of a permitting and entitlement process and development process in the city only adds to the other kind of challenges we have in the regulatory environment and the economic environment.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I wanted to also ask go a little bit further into the difference between public versus private. Obviously, you've had the experience doing both, but even, at your time with the Planning and Development Agency, say for Seaport, for example, you mentioned Seaport, MGM, the Raffles Hotel. Like, can you describe what the process, like your involvement looks like on a private project, like say MGM versus like a public? And again, I don't know what you were working on in Seaport, but I'd assume that there was some public specific developments there. So just curious to see, the contrast between those two.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right, Adam. There's a number of purely private development projects in the city, right? We're seeing few and far between of them now just because it's so challenging. But this city also has a good history of either public projects or public-private partnerships and projects. A lot of the Seaport was originally some level of public-private partnership. If you go further out of the Seaport towards the Marine Park, the Raymond L. Flynn Marine Park, that is all still publicly owned land. So I did a lot of the projects down there too. So that's exactly what you're referencing there, Adam, in these kind of public projects or private projects on public land, whatever way you want to put it. And those are really interesting projects because oftentimes there's some level of RFP, so request for proposals, or LDA, land disposition agreement. There's some level of work that goes into those projects before the city, the Boston Planning Department, or the community, or even the development teams that are interested in these parcels would look at them, because that public body that owns the land or owns these parcels is doing some level of work at very first step in looking at, okay, what do we want, right? Public land is really unique in that you have the ability to be very, very flexible. You can manage your land costs to really be able to drive, okay, we want affordable housing, or we need, for example, in the Marine Park on the edge of the Seaport, that was historically sort of the stronghold for the marine industrial sector in Boston. So the fishing businesses and the seafood processing businesses, which obviously is a huge part of the Boston economy historically, a lot of those businesses have diminished, but it's actually the Boston Planning Department, or one of their economic arm that owns that marine park. It's still a priority for them to be able to support those marine processing businesses and those fishing businesses, those seafood companies. So that's one thing that they're automatically looking at on any parcel down there, right? For example, where Vertex and a number of Ginkgo and a number of the big biopharmaceutical companies are now going to be, there are elements of affordable commercial space or really, really deep public investments, public improvements that are coming out of those parcels, because you have that ability to be a little bit more flexible on publicly owned land. And you have the ability to kind of outright require, right? If you're the public entity, you can say, this is what we want, this is what we need. You can do what you need to do to achieve this, but this is ultimately what the deliverable has to be on these sites. We are seeing now more than ever before the importance and the viability of public-private partnerships. For a long time, they were really challenging to make work. People kind of were hesitant to engage, just because you do end up being subject to a lot more regulation and a lot more steps and time, right? When the economy was good and things were really good for the development sector in this region, it was easier to just do private stuff, right? But now private stuff is really, really hard. So people are kind of transitioning and looking back towards the public sector for some public-private partnerships now. Another really good example of a public-private partnership is the Parcel 12 project that Samuels and Associates did over that air rights project that I reference, sort of in the Back Bay, Fenway, where Citizen M is now, Car Gurus is. You'll see it as you're coming in the Pike from Bentley, driving in town or going out the other way. That was an air rights project. So that was Mass DOT, the Department of Transportation, that owns the highway, owns the Pike, put that parcel out to bid, right? They did an RFP for those air rights. Samuels and Associates won that designation and literally built a project out of nothing there. So that, again, is another really good example of the opportunities. There's leasing costs and there's land agreements and things like that, but you just have a little bit more flexibility and opportunities for really thoughtful and kind of driven focuses when you're looking at public land. For example, with that Parcel 12 project, it was a huge priority for the T through that project to get there. Actually, surprisingly, there was no head house built for the Green Line station right underneath there. There was no accessible head house. That was a priority. And you would think, oh, okay, head house station, not a big deal. It's a few $1,000,000 to do that, right? So the T was like, we're never going to be able to do that. But if we can get that done as a way of this public-private partnership, this development, great. That was a really dangerous intersection for a long time at Boylston and Mass Ave. The whole intersection has been redesigned and rebuilt by way of that project. So public-private unlocks a lot of opportunities for mutual benefit, which I think is really key, particularly now, again, as development's really challenging. I think municipalities and cities and towns are incentivized to be able to leverage private investment to achieve a lot of their public goals that you can't do solely on a tax basis. And private developers now, I think, are increasingly motivated to try to find opportunities to develop, which more often than not now is becoming public-private partnership.
Absolutely. It's a really interesting point, and I want to dive a little bit even further into that. So on the public side, can you walk us through kind of the decision-making process behind, municipality or state saying like, hey, with this land, okay, we're going to open this up for a bid, and we want some sort of development here to spur X, Y, Z, because, there's a multitude of different possibilities for this to happen, but maybe a more simple example you could provide. Just curious how that process actually takes place.
Yeah. So it usually starts with a need, Adam, right? This town or municipality or state, whatever it is saying, okay, we have a need for X, Y, or Z. We have a need for, call it a new school or senior housing or affordable housing, or we have a need for increasing our economic base, our tax base, which usually is done through commercial properties. So that translates to maybe we'll do some level of an economic project that produces a lot of jobs as well. We'll produce good taxes, but also a lot of jobs. So there's a few different things. Starts with a need, and then oftentimes these public bodies will engage with some level of a consultant team that'll help them think through, okay, this is our need. How do we achieve it? And then it becomes almost like a land use study. You can do some sort of test fits to the extent you want to expend resources and time and energy and say, okay, here's what we want to achieve, right? We want to be able to get a school that's going to house X number of students, or we want to be able to produce X number of jobs, or we need to achieve X dollars of tax revenue. And then you sort of back into it from there. Then more often than not, they do become publicly, like fully public RFPs, requests for proposals, processes, or RFIs, requests for interest. Providence, actually, in Rhode Island, is doing a number of them. Providence has an economic development group called the I-95 district that does a really good job. They have a number of parcels in Providence, city-owned, parking lots, parking garages, old buildings, things like that Providence right now, and this through the I-95 group is doing this exact thing, right? Saying, okay, we have a need for example, housing is one of the most recent RFPs they did. So we're going to put this out to bid, and then development groups or nonprofits or whatever it may be, whatever kind of makeup of an entity that comes forward with a proposal can put a bid in. So you're structuring. There's a lot of work that goes into that too on the private side, or whoever the entity is that's making a bid for these RFPs. Because you're essentially going through due diligence. Like we talked about the process a little bit earlier. You're essentially going all the way through due diligence, and even almost to kind of, okay, what's our financing structure going to be? So it's a lot of work with no guarantee of reward. But I think we're seeing an increasing amount of responses to public RFPs now too. Again, because purely private development is really hard to make work. So some of these public RFPs where land is cheaper. Your permitting and your entitlement process might be a little bit easier, at least a little bit more predictable at the very least. It is really appealing to a lot of folks. So in short, Adam, it starts with a need, right? It starts with one of these public bodies saying, okay, we have a real need. How do we leverage what we have to achieve that need? We're starting to see it. We will continue to see the T doing this, right? The MBTA here in the state of Massachusetts doing this with a lot of their parcels. The T owns a lot of land. They obviously own all the land that their stations are on, so red, blue, green, orange, bus lines. But they also own a lot of commuter parking lots and a lot of T-adjacent properties that, as we look around in the state of Massachusetts and we have a real need for housing, the T is looking, saying, okay, how can we maybe get some value out of these empty commuter parking lots because people aren't in the city as much as they used to be and things like that. So that'll be another interesting one to watch down the line. There's a number of RFPs that the T have out right now. There's one at Alewife Station in Cambridge, or they're in the works of one there. And there'll be a number of others that follow, but that'll be another really interesting thing to see how those materialize, because those are some really substantial opportunities when you look at how much land the T owns in this state.
Awesome. So we're getting a little tight on time. So I want to talk a little bit more about your projects, your personal projects. So, what type of properties are you focusing on right now, and and also what markets, and also, well, are you currently working on a project, and also how do you fund these projects? Do you use private investors, friends and family? You can just talk about that specifically.
Yeah. So predominantly focused, Lorenzo, in the city of Boston. Again, it's what I know best. It's what the folks I work with know best. And we have properties that we've owned for a long time, so that makes it a little bit easier to make numbers work right now. Your land base is a little bit lower than what some other people are facing, just because these properties have been in the portfolio for a number of years. We are focused on multifamily, still a need in the city of Boston for multifamily development. We also have some really interesting commercial work going on. We have seen, and I think we'll continue to see in the city, that good commercial spaces will be really, really viable. Now, there's cost to building them out, but if you can kind of figure out ways to make that work and get some really interesting businesses and opportunities, third places, as they might be referred to, kind of, they're not home, they're not work, but they're these third places that people like to spend time. So is it a coffee shop? Is it a gym? Is it some other type of recreation area, a market, things like this, bars, restaurants, these types of things, third places. So I think we see opportunities there as well. So we have some good projects where we'll have some really good ground floor commercial spaces there, which is great because commercial is still a little bit tough in parts of the city. But yeah, we're focused predominantly on multifamily. City housing is tough. We've seen an evolution of sort of the ideal floor plan in the city. The units are getting a little bit smaller. Parking is a challenge in the city, but parking's a challenge to build. So that's an interesting dynamic in a lot of projects now is, okay, well, how much parking do you need to provide? The city wants as little parking as possible. Oftentimes, people living in these buildings would like to have parking if they need it. Some people don't want it. Some people do want it. So it's kind of a fine balance there and trying to figure out what the right number is on any of that piece of it. But look, I think we're focused on the city. I think there's a lot of people that are struggling to make things work in the city right now. There's a lot of people that are frustrated by a lot of things in the city right now, which is all fair. But I think we're fortunate to be in a position where we can make some things work. So we are finishing up work on a 42-unit residential building in the Ashmont neighborhood in Dorchester. That'll have two really good ground floor commercial uses as well. Interesting, sort of a public-private partnership there. The land was private, but there is a public component of the project in some state financing that's supporting affordable workforce housing in that building. So that was another thing that helped minimize our cost of constructing the building and deliver some good, right? And that you've got some deed-restricted affordable housing more so than you would normally. We are in permitting for another sort of 25, 30-unit project in Dorchester as well. That one's a mix of rental and home ownership opportunities, which is interesting. And then we have a number of other smaller scale condos and townhouse projects as well, predominantly in Dorchester, which is kind of our key market, some of the work I'm doing right now. But we're fortunate that we've still got plenty of irons in the fire, which again is, we recognize how fortunate we are in that sense, because there's a lot of stuff that just doesn't work right now.
Yeah, I mean, I just on that same point that you just made, that stuff doesn't work. I mean, how are you? Because I'm working with a developer, and he's focusing a lot on condominiums, luxury condominiums, and when I'm running my numbers, multifamily, numbers don't work. Obviously, like you said, the land bases, you have a lower land basis, so that's probably the point that makes it work, right? They say all the time that you can't really change construction costs, you can't really change financing costs. The only thing that you can really, the profit is in the buy, right, in the land. So that's where a lot of people get creative. I've heard about people doing JVs, partnerships with the actual landowner. So just talk a little bit about how our for those students, how you can find profitable projects in today's market, basically.
Yep. Good question. The golden question, the one everyone's trying to figure out, right? So I think number one is land basis, right? Again, a lot of what we're working on right now only works because it's been in the portfolio for a long time. So it's not anywhere near, the acquisition costs and the land carry costs are not anywhere near what they would be if you're trying to buy something now or if you had bought something 3, 4, 5 years ago. Number two is, you referenced it, Lorenzo, construction costs are incredibly high right now, increasing almost every week, every month. We'll see what happens with tariffs. That may make things a little bit worse too. And yes, they are what they are, but they can also be managed and mitigated to a certain extent. So we have the ability to be the general contractor on everything we build, which allows us to better control costs, right? So part of the development process in any pro forma is sort of trickle down economics, right? For everything that happens, it trickles down somewhere and someone has to make a profit on that, right? So if you're a developer, you've got to pay a general contractor, and that general contractor has to make money on the project in addition to paying the subcontractors who all have to make money on the project. So to the extent you can kind of eliminate the middleman on a lot of this stuff, there are opportunities for cost savings there. So that is something in particular. I think the majority of things we're seeing happening in the city right now, successful projects that can actually generate some level of profitability, are ones where the developer is more often than not also the general contractor.
Thanks for that, Ashlyn. I also, really quick, just wanted to touch on the third places. I think this is a really, really interesting concept, and kind of, make sure to integrate these third places, try to bring them back a little bit. You've seen a decrease in people being able to spend time at these third places or even having that third place themselves. Just curious to further, hear your perspective on these third places, kind of the role that they're playing in projects that you're involved in. And obviously there's an argument for people's well-being and whatnot with these third places, but just curious to hear kind of your thought process around them and how you're trying to integrate them, what role that they might play in future development projects.
Yeah, really good question. And something that is increasingly important now, Adam, too, right? As, okay, there's a good amount of stuff sitting on the market, right? Units sitting on the market that aren't moving or aren't selling. So you kind of have to differentiate yourself in a lot of the stuff that you're doing now to try to be marketable. So I personally like to think about, okay, where do people want to spend time? How do they want to spend their time, right? If you're not at home, if you work from home and you have an office in the house, that's great. But if you want to be able to get out, even just 1 or 2 days a week, where are you spending your time, right? Within the building, if you live in an apartment building, for example, what types of spaces do you want to be spending the time? What's going to make you get up from your desk in your apartment or from your kitchen countertop, whatever it may be, and want to go somewhere else? I think we've really evolved as a human race over the last couple of years. People really appreciate experiences right now. So that's a lot of what I'm focused on is how do you provide unique and really, really good experiences for people. And oftentimes that will make people want to be there. I think when people are making decisions now more so than ever before on where they live, where companies want to have offices, where they want to bring people to work, it's not just about that building itself. It's about what's happening around that building, what's on the ground floor, what coffee options are available, or what lunch options are available, or what's in the neighborhood, what can they walk to. So these are things that people are paying attention to way more than we ever did before. And it's interesting, right? It's retail and commercial is hard to make work. It's hard to do good spaces really well. But the ones that you can do really well can oftentimes work really well.
Got it. So obviously we're running a little bit out of time, but you touched on, the current economic climate and, in Boston, actually specifically overall, but I want to now get your thoughts on what do you think is going to be in the future, overall commercial real estate, the economy, but also more specifically on Boston as well.
Yeah, good question. I don't want to say unfortunately, but I tend to be a little bit more on the negative side on the long term, or short, medium term. I won't say long term, but short, medium term outlook for the city of Boston. I think we're really going to struggle with the rent growth that a lot of people are hoping we'll see. I think that'll be purely influenced by people have way more flexibility now in where they choose to live and where they choose to spend their time, where they choose to work. I think we benefited for so long from being a really diversified economy, right? Challenges to immigration now, and that challenges we're seeing into immigration are going to affect a lot of our eds and meds, a lot of our student population. The cost of living here is really expensive now too, so that's influencing people's decisions every single day on where they want to be. Ultimately, you have to be a really attractive place to be healthy, right? And I think we've lost a little bit of that over the last couple of years. So in my personal opinion, again, I hope I'm wrong on this, but my personal opinion is I don't think we see the rent growth that people are hoping we'll see in this city long term. I think we'll continue to have a supply issue, but I think we'll probably end up losing a lot of our net numbers in migration and influx every year that, it might kind of balance out a little bit. And, I think it's just so challenging right now to produce new supply. So what we're seeing, I think, will continue to be kind of, we've got a backlog, right, of a lot of new stuff coming online that people just haven't pulled the trigger on. I don't even know the numbers off the top of my head, but across the region, I'm sure there's a boatload of units sitting, waiting, ready to go, hoping something changes and that the projects can be financeable and the numbers can make sense. So if that stuff changes, those are ready to go. Those will come online, which I think then brings a whole bunch of supply into the mix. So I think we've got that on the sidelines. I think we nationally, I don't know how much that story plays out nationally. I think there's still some really good areas for opportunity and growth within this region. I think I'm personally focused on sort of secondary and tertiary markets, where anything I'm looking at right now, if we're buying something, it's like, okay, there's got to be an opportunity for rent growth or sales. I have to feel really, really confident that this area is going to be worth, or this property is going to be worth more, whether that's the rent prices or whether that's the sales price 5 years from now than it is right now. And I think that's the crux of the challenge for city development right now, right? I'm not convinced that if I'm buying a triple decker right now in the city of Boston, that's going to be worth more, or that I can change those rents any more than they already have over the next 5 years. If I'm buying a triple decker in Plymouth, for example, Providence area, for example, I feel pretty strongly that there'll be some good rent growth, opportunities for rent growth, or some increase in value in those properties or those areas. So I think people just have to, we are focused again on, looking at different areas that you maybe wouldn't have looked at previously. But that has to be the basis, I think, is people need to be focused on, where is there opportunities for additional value? Because I think we've seen so much change in value in the city of Boston in a very short amount of time, theoretically, that I think we're maybe going to be stuck here for a little bit before we see any more change.
Awesome. Very interesting take. And I mean, I don't want to say I agree or disagree. I don't really,
not
as much as you, but
it's a controversial subject. And like I said, I hope I'm wrong, right? For the benefit of the city, I hope I'm wrong. But sort of just that's my personal take on it right now, where we stand.
So just kind of wrapping it up, where do you see yourself in the next 3 to 5 years? You specifically, your business and your projects.
Yeah, good question. We'll see. I'm not sure. I go back and forth. Doing your own stuff is really fun, right? I'm very fortunate right now. A lot of the projects in groups I'm working with are fantastic. I've really been enjoying doing some of the smaller scale commercial retail stuff, which I'd never worked on before. But that's really rewarding. You're working with small business owners. For example, we're working with a woman who's opening a Pilates studio in one of our buildings in Dorchester right now. And that's really, really fun, right? She's great. This is her pride and joy. It's her baby. We're giving her the opportunity to operate and own the space, or be in the space. So that's really fun. We're working on a bar and restaurant. That's really fun too. We've got a couple other different concepts. So we'll see. I think one of the things that I enjoy most about real estate, and one of the greatest things, is that it's pretty broad, right? Yes, you can be in real estate, but you can wear any number of different hats or do any number of different things. So I think the economics will continue to evolve of the market over the next maybe year, 2 years, and we'll see how things shake out. So I'm personally focused on continuing to be as well-rounded and well-informed as I can be, because I think there will be opportunities in places that people probably never expected them to be over the next couple of years, and there'll be challenges in places where you never expected challenges over the next couple of years. So just trying to be again, well-rounded and well-informed to try to navigate both opportunities and challenges as they arise.
Fantastic. All right. Kind of a last question. I do want to give a shout out real quick. Everybody, go connect with Ashlyn on LinkedIn. I'm sure she'd be happy to, connect with you guys there. I'll obviously let you say if you have any final words, but my last question was going to be really, what advice would you give to young professionals or students looking to get into development, or really any industry within real estate, just from a general interest perspective?
Yeah. I would come back to sort of what I just referenced there, being well-rounded and well-informed. I think real estate's really interesting for a number of reasons. One of those reasons being it's essentially a byproduct of human nature. Human nature has changed since COVID. Human nature will continue to change. But real estate is literally a study every day of, okay, how are people spending their time? Where are they spending their time? Where are they spending their dollars? How are they making those dollars? So it's, it's the real estate market and the real estate industry is a byproduct of what's happening at a human scale in this world every single day. And that means, okay, the more you know about what's happening at a political level, what's happening at an economic level, what's happening at a neighborhood level, what are some of the big economic trends we're seeing across the country or across your market? What are some of the challenges we're seeing? What are some interesting markets that are emerging? Those are things that will ultimately need space, right? What changes are we seeing in colleges and universities in terms of where are those students going after they graduate? What types of degrees are they getting? This all informs what the need for, coming back to kind of this notion of places and spaces. Real estate is places and spaces. What are the needs for places and spaces? So the more well-rounded you can be on what's happening in the world around you, the more informed you can be on what's happening in the world around you, the better enabled you will be to make decisions on what the needs of places and spaces are and how you can react and respond to those needs.
Awesome. Ashlyn, thank you so much. Obviously, we ran out of time, so thank you so much for everything. Really enjoyed it, and really, really appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. This is great. And a shout out as well, Lorenzo and Adam, to all you guys and anyone else who's involved in the real estate group. It's fantastic. I wish we'd had it when I was there. Great initiatives. You guys have been doing a really, really good job. And, you guys both said it, but look, we're very fortunate. Bentley's got a great network, and you'll come out into great networks too, I'm sure, across the region and wherever you guys may end up. But certainly I know there's a number of alumni, myself included, that are more than happy, and, we'll do whatever we can to help folks. So please keep up the good work. Wish you guys all the best in your, Adam, finishing out your senior year, and Lorenzo heading into some exciting internship opportunities this summer. But this has been great. Thank you guys for having me. Very much appreciated.
Thank you
so
Have
much.
a great day.
I appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.